today I was wanting to talk on water flow on your pool heaters. I think water flow is like the most common issue on a pool heater service. Anybody disagree? Between all the different kinds of pool heaters, water flow is typically like our most common call out. Things aren't working right and it's not actually the heater's fault. And so we need to understand, one, how to diagnose our water issues, but then also how does the water flow work on a pool system. I think I get a lot of calls where I'm sent pictures and had conversations and it's solved somewhere in the water flow. So first of all, what does low water flow do to our heaters?
It doesn't turn it on.
Okay.
Pressure switch.
Yep, so the most extreme will be the water pressure switch. It is designed that if there's not enough pressure on that switch, then the pool heater doesn't come on. So what's our error code there?
It's like low flow or something like that.
Yeah, it's typically FLO, flow. Some of them LO, which is low flow. Yep. And then how do we diagnose the water pressure switch being an issue?
Pull out you either bypass it at the board or pull out the filter, or make sure the pump is on.
Yep. So he's right. First thing that you should be looking at is not the switch, but going straight into water flow diagnosis and finding out how do I actually prove maybe the switch is doing its job and keeping this thing off. A switch will fail sometimes, fail closed to where the heater doesn't shut off. And if it fails closed where your heater doesn't shut off when the pump shuts off,
High head pressure.
high head pressure. Yep. Or if it's a gas heater,
High limit.
high limit. Yep. That's exactly right. So we have our high limits, which work as the safeties instead of the high pressure switch on our heat pump. Running the gas heater, it's the high limits, which is water temperature. The water temperature gets really high, the high limit switch will open. And if it opens too many times, it'll pull a lockout. But it's designed so that when it cools back down, it'll close on its own. But they will sometimes fail open. If they've been triggered to open a lot, they will fail open. So water pressure switch failing is pretty rare, but you can prove it by making sure you have good water flow. So that's what we'll talk about, making sure we have good water flow. Okay, so Adriel mentioned the first thing you want to check when you suspect low water flow, the filter. Does everyone here know how to do that?
I think so. You gotta open the little venti thing or whatever.
Okay, so first we're going to turn the pump off of a high pressure, and there is a vent on top of the heater, the filter, that you can open up and it releases the pressure. Well, all that water in the tank will start to drift back down into the pool, which is lower than the filter tank. And then you take the top off, pull the filter out. Typically a visual check isn't good enough. You'll start to learn what dirty looks like when it's really bad. But pulling it out, sticking it in, it could be...
If it looks like a pickle, it's probably dirty.
Yes,
Okay.
there are some visual cues.
Put this guy in a van.
Yeah.
But a lot of property managers will like pressure wash them, or they'll like take a really like heavy stream of water. It won't look dirty.
Yeah, but it has algae impacted in it. It should have been replaced. At some point they need to be replaced. So if they're not cleaned well, they can work pretty good, but they can have algae impacted. So you take it out and you run the pump without the filter in there, and that's one of the best ways to see the difference. You have the possibility of water flow issues in the piping or in the valves themselves. What's another way we can diagnose a water flow issue?
You can actually check valves and make sure everything's pointing the right way.
Okay, so checking valves, making sure everything's pointing the right way. Yeah, so you'll need to understand how the water flow should be going and how the valve should be turned. Start with your visual cues though, go to the pool and look at the water movement for our jets. And so typically water flow issues, like if we have a pump that's not working properly, you're not gonna have a lot of water flow. You'll be spitting out a couple air bubbles from the jets as it's struggling. Another common issue on water flow is that the pool has come down low enough that it's sucking in air through our skimmer. So a skimmer is one of the areas that the water gets pulled into the pump, and it's a cleaning mechanism. Things on top of the water come into a filter. But if the water's low enough that it's sucking in air, and typically it's like it'll pull water, and then there'll be this gush of air, you'll hear it, like Jessica says, you'll hear it, it's sucking in air, and then the water will kind of spill over into it, unless it's so low it's only pulling air. And that causes the pump to cycle and lose its prime when that patch of air comes through. And then the pump will prime itself, it'll run for just a little bit, and then go back out on low water. What can you do in that situation to test your equipment?
Put a hose in the pool, fill it up.
So you could put, that would take too long.
Wow.
Yeah, the best way is to go find your skimmer valve and turn it off so the water flow is not coming in through that skimmer and you're not sucking in air. And at that point you can test your heater, make sure everything's working, and then have a conversation with the homeowner or property manager about filling it up and turning the skimmer back on. That they need to have somebody come out and address the low pool.
It's always the long stays that have that like skimmer issue, because the sun beats down on the pool and nobody's there to refill it.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly right. So let's talk a little bit about water flow and the pool diagrams. I pulled this up from an AquaCal heater manual. And so if you look down here at the bottom, this one has a heater and a spa in place. A little bit of descriptions on the side for what the numbers mean. But our pump, typically when you are looking at your water flow, you see the P here, the pump. Typically when you're looking at your water flow, the pump is going to let you know which direction the water is flowing and where things are coming from. So that's your first point of reference. A pump has the water intake coming straight into that clear tube, and it has a filter inside of it. So that's the first possible water flow restriction. If something, a bag, something big has clogged that filter restriction coming into the pump, that's the intake for the pump. And so the water comes straight from the drains, which are on the base of the pool, and the skimmer, and then into that pump. And as you see here in the diagram, it comes from D and S, which is the drain and the skimmer, and into the three-way valve. So you'll have a set of valves. And often a pool will have two drains. So there'll be two Ds and one S, and coming into a set of valves right before the pump. And that valve there is where you could turn it off to one of those pipes coming in. It would turn it off to that skimmer, right? And then listed right on the valve itself, if it has the handle, is the direction of on and off. And then if the valve is missing its handle, there's a little notch. That the smallest notch is the off direction. And you grab a handle from any of the other valves and walk it over to the one you need to turn, just to confirm its direction. It'll show off, and then the handle's typically pointing towards on. Okay? The important thing to know about water flow when you are connected with the spa is that the spa has its own drain and its own returns. The returns are the jets, water coming back to the pool. So it's opposite of like your AC. whereas what the pump intakes, we would normally call the return. But the return and supply is just labeled opposite in the pools. The drains are the supply, the jets are the return. And you will sometimes literally just see return and supply written on the pool equipment. 3, right here past the heater, we have another valve. What would the purpose of this valve be?
Cooler style mode.
Spa mode. Yep. So this is typically an actuator that turns on and off, and it has the ability to actually shut off flow feeding back to our spa and shut off flow directed to our jets. But we're not actually going to operate in spa mode unless over here this other 3 does the same thing in the pool drain. Shuts off pulling from the pool drain and then directs only pulling from the spa. So a common water flow issue that you're going to run into this year is the spa is not heating up, and it looks like the heater operates fine. It runs constantly. The spa mode is activating. You see all the bubbles coming on in the spa, but it's still pulling from the main drain. The jets got redirected to the spa only, but it's still pulling water from the main pool. So all of the pool's water is trying to circulate, forced through that spa. What would be the indicator there that you could use to find that? How would you diagnose that?
Actuator's not pointing in the right direction.
Okay, so your actuator, which direction is it pointing on the return side? Yeah, that's exactly right. Also, your spa spills over the waterfall when it's still pulling from the drain of the main pool. If it's pulling from the spa, then it'll spill over for a little bit as it empties out, but then it's just going to run without spilling over the waterfall, because the same water that's pulling in is feeding back into the spa. So that's what you want to see. When you turn that dial and you've activated spa mode, come back in a couple minutes, take a look at the spa, make sure it's not still dumping over the waterfall of the spa. And that'll let you know that it's isolated water flow into that spa area. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, here's just another visual for you guys. We have our ground line. A lot of times it can be hard to follow the flow of a pool heater because things drop into the ground and you're not really sure where they come up next. But here's a couple telltale signs. Here at the end we have our chemical feeder. And the chemical feeder is always the last thing on the circuit before the pool. So they don't want the chemical feeder to go through the filter, to go through the pool heater. So that's, you find that, and you typically are finding the last thing on the pool circuit. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. This is called it's not called a chemical loop, it's called a Hartford. I think it's Hartford.
Yeah.
Hartford loop. The goal of this is to be above the chemical feeder, so that when the pump shuts off at night, the chlorinator, we don't have chemical flow coming back in and filling and just sitting in our pool heaters. They also have a check valve is another common thing, and I'll show a picture of that later on. Okay, manual bypass valve. This is a really common water flow issue on pool heaters. This valve is open, and so the water, as you can see coming into our heater, is not being forced, all of it's not being forced through the heater. Some of the water is going through the bypass. And so you close that bypass and you force your full water flow through that. It is most common out of the filter to have our water flow go straight into our heater next, and then out from there to, this doesn't show the jets and the different valves for directing that back to the pool heater jets.
This was also written before solar.
Yes, there were a couple solar options that I decided to keep it simple and keep the solar out of the circuit. But when there is a solar, you just have straight off of one of these after the pump, after the filter, a pipe going up to solar and coming back down. And usually an actuator to shut it on and off.
Are you talking about solar thermal or solar photovoltaic?
The thermal that heats up water, acts as a water heater.
Do they pipe those in series or they pipe them like in parallel with the rest of the circuit?
They put it in series.
Okay.
Like the water, you do have an option to bypass it. There's usually a valve there that can bypass it.
Okay.
Typically, but when it's on, it goes in there first
Okay.
before it goes to your heater. That way, the sun can try to work on the coldest part of the water before it actually hits your heater.
Gotcha.
Okay, so this is typically the view that you're gonna see looking down on your equipment, right? So we talked about this. This is our filter pump. We know what our intake is because our intake comes into this clear glass tube on the pump, right? And then our outtake goes straight to the filter typically. And then here we have our pool heater. And this is another common version of a bypass on the pool heater. If you see the way that it is set up right here, it's turned to be open so the water can flow right through the bypass. And you'd want it turned closed so the water is forced through the heater. Actually, this one isn't a bypass, is it? This is after the heater. I don't know what that's a spa makeup. I'm not sure what that's for. It looks like an option to bypass the spa actuator. This shows a check valve in place. There's often a check valve if you don't have the Hartford loop, you have a check valve option. And if you guys see that, it's a little clear sight glass, and then inside of it's a spring-loaded damper, and that will, sometimes the spring will break, that'll get clogged, and will be creating your water flow issues. Once I saw it installed backwards, so whenever they turn the bypass off to the pool heater, and the water was forced to go through the pool heater, it slammed it shut. So they'd had this for years before realizing what had happened, because if you have the bypassing the heater and the bypass valve open, then the water will just go around the heater. They didn't use their heater for years. We found it, dug it up, cut it out, flipped it. All right, first thing you notice that's unusual here?
Two pumps.
Two pumps, yeah. So,
Send senior deck back.
when you have two pumps, typically one of them is used for like a spa or a specific section, or you just have a massive pool and they're tied in together. This looks like it's separated, like it's not tied in. You see your full normal pool setup here with this pump and your filter. So this is what you're actually going to be looking at in real life. And you can see that coming in here, this is our intake from our pool. So these valves are going to be responsible, these first set of 4 pipes, for our drains and our skimmer. So we have 2 drains on the pool, we have our skimmer, and then we have our spa intake.
How do you know the order, or are you guessing?
I'm guessing, but this is how we do it. The pool will have 2 drains, the spa only has 1. So these 2 pipes that are connected to a valve together are gonna be the pool drains.
Gotcha.
The skimmer just has 1 pipe coming in if there's just 1 skimmer, and it's probably marked skimmer there. And we have another valve to isolate the skimmer if we need to. And then the spa is usually the one that has the actuator, so that we can turn off to the pool and only feed from our spa. So there is a bit of looking at it and kind of eliminating possibilities that way.
You could also force the toggle switches and then just watch the water flow in the pool.
Yes, you can. You need to be careful if you've cut if you cut the water completely off from the pump, like it has nowhere to flow, it's quite a bit of pressure, it's usually a pretty loud hit to the pump. So pay attention as you're turning, don't just whip a valve shut. Pay attention as you're shutting, you'll hear the pump complain if you're cutting water flow completely off.
It'll be hard to turn.
It is also hard to turn, yeah. Yeah, this guy's tried this.
Turn.
Okay, on here we have also our feed coming out of the pump and coming straight into the heater. This picture doesn't show a bypass, so I don't see one there. But then coming out of the heater into our jets going to our pool is what it looks like. And one of these is probably going to feed the spa, because we have our actuator here, and then the other side to our pool jets. And buried in here, right on the edge of the rock, is a bypass valve. So after this one, out of view is our chlorinator chemical setup somewhere out of view in this picture. And that's why they had the bypass valve before the heater.
It's a bypass valve, not a check valve?
I'm sorry, the check valve, thank you. It's a check valve. So here's a typical bypass setup. We have our heater and then the valve coming out. So the one way, no return, spring-loaded valve up at the top. And then another visual for you on bypass. This one is a 2-valve bypass. So basically, you turn both of these valves here so that the water doesn't flow here through the middle. That's what we're trying to eliminate. We want the water, all the water forced into our heater and back out of our heater. So if this top one's open or the bottom one's open, there's potential for water to kind of spill, cycle around, right? Whereas if we take this bottom one and we shut it off to here, then this is now a dead end for our water flow, and the water can flow by, come through here, it'll hit the dead end, keep going through. So there's no reason for them to have the 3-way on either side like that. You typically just see it on the return side. This is what it looks like in real life. There's our bypass valve, and this pipe down here on the bottom just connects and goes through right here. So you can see when this valve is turned to the off like this is off. Then the water flow comes in and goes out the one side of the valve. If it was turned any other way, water flow would just bypass a lot of the heater and come out straight through here. Just travel right through that bypass. So keep your eye out for possible water flow issue on the bypass valves. Why is it important that we have water in and water out on our heaters?
Does it have to cool a refrigerant? You have to cool a refrigerant if it's running?
You do need water flow, yes, but I mean, why do we have directions? Like when you're installing a pool heater, it's important to have the intake and the outtake on your water flow to be actually hooked up to the right sides.
Is it gravity?
You can hook, it's not. What's that?
Cold water instead of
Yep, so that's the closest. The water temperature sensor is on the end. It's labeled up there at the top of the slide. So you don't want the pool heater heating the water before it's checking the water temperature, right? So every once in a while you get some issues where a pool heater was installed backwards, and when the heater comes on, it affects the reading temperature of the water, so that it will shut off prematurely and then come back on and cycle a lot without heating up your pool. Especially in the spa where it can heat up pretty quick. It'll always cycle off early. And so the return sensor, the water temperature sensor needs to be on the intake, the water intake to our pool. And then that also can be an indication for you if you're not really sure which way is flow going. You could look in the heater, find the water temperature sensor, and then understand that should be my intake and this will be my outtake then. So that's one clue you can use when you're walking through the whole water flow and you're trying to isolate what pipe does what. You can understand water flow direction in that way. Okay, the Hartford versus the check valve. There's a visual on your check valve. And so you could, typically when there's good water flow through it, you see the water rushing by, and the check valve looks like this. It's pretty much never all the way open. It's just, you have shut versus like 45-degree angle is open coming through there. If you have way too much air and the pump is cycling on and off like it's losing its prime, you'll notice the valve opening and closing. So it can help you with diagnosis sometimes. And I don't have anything I need to say about the Hartford loop, other than that if you are installing a pool heater, you need some method. So build one yourself if there's not a loop there or a check valve there in place.
So one or the other, not both necessarily.
You don't necessarily need both. Yeah.
Whoa, yikes.
I
Leave that one.
left this one here just because it's a common issue and you guys will do some repairs. But when you do a pool heater high pressure joint, prime it first, and then when you use your glue, hold the connection in place for at least 30 seconds. What happens is that the chemical bond happening creates some pressure as it expands. And so then what should be bonding, where it should be bonding the PVC to PVC, it's pushing it apart. The chemical reaction is pushing that bond apart as you go. So if you just make a really clean connection and leave it, typically it'll be leaking water there when it's time to turn on the water. So you make that connection and it takes quite a bit of pressure, one joint at a time, pushing those joints together for 30 seconds, giving it time to bond without expanding, so it's not breaking its own joint as it's trying to bond.
And you have to use primer on water connections like that, right?
Yeah,
And not regular PVC glue either.
yeah, you have to. It has to be heavy duty, rain or shine. So that's the blue stuff, but we have that in clear form out there now. But it says on there, rain or shine, which means it can work with water.
Some inspectors want to see the color.
Mm-hmm.
They think if there's no purple or blue or whatever, then it's not properly done.
Yeah, we've had that issue before where we had to call them and say, well, there's clear primer now, there's clear PVC glue.
Too bad we don't pull permits on pool heaters.
Yeah, so we've had that issue before. But I do want you guys to know that, so if you're doing a heat exchanger on a pool heater, and you're gonna be doing PVC connections, save yourself having to redo it. Take it back, let's just be practical again with water flow. When you have that issue, your pool heater will give you a flow error code when it's bad enough. If it's not bad enough, then low water flow directly affects your pressures. It increases your head pressure. The water flow is what's used to get rid of the heat and the refrigerant, right? So it's the same as not having a working condenser fan motor on your AC. You're gonna have a crazy high head. And so when you have poor water flow, you're looking for things like the high pressure switch going off, a high pressure error code when you show up, high pressure lockout, and you are suspecting water flow right away. If it's bad enough, it'll climb within like 5 seconds. Within like 5 seconds, it'll go out on high head. And it can be very difficult to prove that versus a TXV slam shut. You only have a little bit of time to diagnose that. So, in order to do that, you just check all your water flow boxes. You make sure your bypass valve, if there is one in place, is closed. You pull out the filter and you try running it without the filter. You verify that you actually have good flow coming out of the jets inside the pool. And then if all of those indicators are giving you good water flow and it's still going out on high head instantly, then we're looking at a slant course TXV. And then another possible water flow issue is that you have a high pressure limit keeps popping up on the pool heater. It keeps shutting off on high pressure. And the issue is that our flow switch is stuck closed. So at night when the pump shuts off, the water flow shuts off, but the heater keeps running. The flow switch is used to tell the heater that our pump has turned off. So in that situation, it'll keep running and go out on high head pressure. So if you show up and you have the high head pressure limit, we're thinking water flow, we're starting with all those boxes. If we don't find anything, we're turning off the pump and confirming that the heater actually shuts off with the pump. The pressure switch is doing its job. So, and then a little bit of time, look up some diagrams if you need to, but a little bit of time isolating, okay, this can't be the pool jets, this has to be the pool jets. I only have one feed coming in here, this is probably my skimmer. Looking in the pool, okay, I have 2 drains, so there's gonna be 2 pipes coming out of the drain, and coming back over and seeing what comes out of the ground. Spend a little bit of time getting familiar with that so that you're not lost in pool heater water diagnosis. Cool. That's it.
Thanks for watching. If you're willing, give this video a thumbs up and drop us a comment. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to stay updated with all of our future videos. And as a quick reminder, HVAC School isn't just a YouTube channel. Dive deeper with us at our main website, hvacrschool.com. Curious for more knowledge on the go? We've got you covered. Tune into the HVAC School podcast, available on all your favorite podcast apps. And while you're at it, join our thriving Facebook group. Also, don't miss out on our free mobile applications available for both iPhone and Android. We're all about community. For techs, by techs.